Welcome to the first episode in a Legendarium series about the mythology of ancient Greece, and we'll be starting off with zombie tales of the ancient Greeks. First, we'll talk about the ancient Greeks' view of zombies, and then we'll cover 3 zombie tales: the Hero of Temesa, Philinnion, and Periander of Corinth. If you are a regular viewer of this channel, then you know that a cultural obsession with zombies is something that came long before film and television. Indeed, it goes back past the Middle Ages to that supposed time of reason and justice, ancient Greece. Necrophobia, or fear of the dead, likely comes from the fact that people were around death all the time, until we invented nifty things like disinfectants and antibiotics. People saw the ghastly rotting of bodies all the time as they stiffened and bloated and decomposed, so it's small wonder that they saw the dead as terrors to be feared. Indeed, in many world cultures, revenants, or zombies, are described as being similar to decomposing corpses, with ruddy or dark complexions, swollen and bloated bodies, an evil smell, open eyes and mouths, and blood around the lips, nose, eyes, and ears. Like many people who lived before the modern age, and more than a few afterwards, the ancient Greeks believed that the dead could rise from their graves. However, instead of believing that misfired satellites or toxic waste would revive the dead, the ancient Greeks believed that necromancers were responsible. Now, just like in medieval Europe and Rome, most forms of magic were tolerated by the ruling powers and society at large during the time of ancient Greece. However, necromancy was seen as evil and anti-social magic, strictly forbidden. The ancient Greeks believed that necromancers coaxed the dead out of their graves by placing thin sheets of lead inscribed with binding spells into graves during nighttime ceremonies. Usually, necromancers raised the dead for a specific purpose, like having a loved one avenge their own murder or retrieving stolen goods. And even if it wasn't possible for a corpse to leave his or her tomb, the necromancer could still cajole the spirit out of the underworld and persuade them to perform all manner of mischief. Indeed, in places where people particularly feared the dead rising, they would break open their graves and weigh them down with giant stones or earthenware vases. Given such beliefs, it's not surprising that the ancient Greeks gave us 3 of the first known zombie stories. The first Greek zombie story comes to us from one of the best-known Greek myths, the story of Odysseus. During his 10-year journey home from the Trojan War, Odysseus was forced to make anchor at the island of Temesa to escape a violent storm. One of his men became drunk and forced himself upon one of the local women. The outraged Temesans seized the sailor and stoned him to death in accordance with their laws. Odysseus, seemingly uninterested in the man's fate, left the island without attending to his shipmate's body, and the islanders simply left the dead sailor there to rot. However, since the dead sailor had been left unburied, he could not rest in peace. And in the style of a modern horror movie, he rose from the dead and terrorized the island, killing the inhabitants one by one. And rather than wait until there was only one among them left, the islanders asked the prophet at Pythia for help. There were many such oracles in ancient Greece besides Delphi. And the prophetess commanded the Temesans to appease the dead man by sacrificing a beautiful maiden to him each year. They did so, and the killing stopped. One year, the famed Olympic boxer Euthymius came to the island around the time of the sacrificial ceremony. He fell in love with the woman chosen for sacrifice and challenged the dead man to a boxing match. And being a hero, Euthymius won, forced the dead man out to sea, and claimed the woman as his bride. At first, the story seems to highlight the arbitrary nature with which the gods ruled the ancient Greek world, with people being punished for following the law. However, it also demonstrates the great importance that Greeks attached to burial, with even infamous criminals being entitled to funerary rites. Second, we have the story of the maiden Philinnion, who was married to Craterus, one of the generals of Alexander the Great. Sadly, she died after only a few weeks of marriage, which could happen in a time before regular medical checkups and medicines that didn't include animal feces. Yes, that was an actual Greek practice. her husband Craterus took pity on her and had a necromancer bring her back to life so that she could enjoy a little bit of married life before she went to the underworld. The necromancer put the lead tablet into her grave, and Philinnion crawled out to visit a young man named Macades, visiting him in his bedchamber every single night. Of course, they made a great ruckus, and eventually Macades' parents burst in to discover Philinnion with their son. Philinnion claimed that she was only brought back to enjoy a little of married life, and her purpose fulfilled, she died. Now, when evaluating the story, we need to keep in mind that Greek literature was filled with strange occurrences that mixed the everyday workaday world with talking beasts, incredibly tall spirit women, visions from gods, ghosts, and even zombies. And what this shows us is that a belief in ghosts and revenants was rooted firmly in mainstream life in ancient Greece, not the lunatic fringe. The third story we'll be talking about is the tale of Periander, the tyrant of Corinth, and his wife Melissa. Periander was a king of such evil and greed that even his own wife Melissa didn't trust him with money. So Melissa hid a large treasure of gold and silver where he wouldn't find it. Not long after, Melissa passed away. And though he was a greedy man who abused his power for personal gain, Periander did genuinely love his wife. So much that in the throes of grief and heartbreak, he removed Melissa's clothes and coupled with her cold, lifeless corpse before it was buried. Needless to say, the ancient Greeks viewed this as a gross defilement of the dead. Not long afterwards, Periander began wondering why his treasury looked so empty. So he went to the priests at the Necromantion, the temple of the dead, to commune with the spirit of his dead wife Melissa and ask her where she hid that money. Melissa's spirit returned to her skeletal remains and spoke to her dead husband. And Melissa told Periander that she would not tell him where she hid the money because she had no clothes in the afterworld. Distrustful, or perhaps embarrassed, Periander asked Melissa's corpse for proof that she was indeed his late wife. She responded by saying that she knew Periander put his loaves into a cold oven, a euphemism referring to what Periander did to Melissa's corpse. Upon hearing this, Periander ordered his men to forcibly disrobe the local women, and then he burned their garments in an offering to his wife. Grateful to have clothes in the underworld, Melissa did indeed tell Periander where she hid the treasure. However, that treasure came at great cost to Periander. The men of Corinth were so outraged by this humiliation of their wives and daughters that they took up arms, and then took the tyrant's head from his body. And one can't help but wonder if Melissa was chortling in the underworld at the way she helped to avenge the defilement of her body. And this story shows us that the ancient Greeks believed a tyrant was not necessarily a king who held absolute power, but a king who used that absolute power to benefit himself rather than all his subjects. And that they believed the Greek gods usually had some poetic justice waiting for such men. And that wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you saw, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great day.